Hey everybody, Leah Klett here with the Christian Post, and my guest today is journalist, podcaster, and author Billy Hallowell. He is behind a brand new documentary called Investigating the Supernatural. This is such a cool documentary. I got to screen it yesterday. Why did you want to take on this investigative journey into modern miracles? This is a topic a lot of people are like, I don't want to touch this.
Yeah, I mean, it's like there's so many topics like that, right? And this is one of them. And for me, this project actually came about. It was supposed to be a three-part TV series, and we went into it, and it was one of those things. I really feel like it was a God project, not to be cliche, but yeah, you have projects where they sort of come out of nowhere, they happen, and then they're just happening, and it's rolling, and before you know it, you're filming. And so we were filming this. We started in October of 2023, and as soon as we got out in the field to create the first episode of this series, we started telling these miracle stories, and we immediately realized this is not a TV series. This is a feature film, and it's probably a feature film series. And so what went from a series about miracles, heaven and hell, angels and demons, all the tough topics, became one feature film on miracles. And so really just it was so incredible, the stories, that we felt we needed more time to tell them.
In the beginning, you say that you consider yourself a bit of a skeptic when it comes to modern miracles. What was your mindset going into this project?
Yeah, and I think you'll appreciate this too, doing what you do. Going into this, obviously I've been a Christian my whole life, right? I believe in miracles, I believe they're possible, but I also know there are a lot of things that can be said that aren't true. There are people who overread into things. So I went into it really feeling like I believe all of these things are true potentially, but I want it to be proven to me. Don't just tell me, show me. And so that was our approach, to show and not just tell. We felt like, look, we have really compelling cases, and we spent a lot of time going through case files and looking at cases to see, okay, who has a really compelling story, one that an atheist or an agnostic would even have to say, okay, well, something weird happened, right? Maybe they don't think it's God, but they know that it's not normal for a brain tumor to disappear without any treatment whatsoever. I would argue even that there are times that people get treatment for their brain tumors and it is a miracle, even though they've got the treatment. But we had a case with Dr. Josh Brown where he had a brain tumor that disappeared entirely over the course of time with him only praying and going to prayer events. That's compelling. So, going into it skeptically, I wanted to make sure that I wasn't just believing something that didn't have backing, and that we could give the audience cases that were very ironclad and strong. And so that was our goal going into this. And over the course of, a year of filming, I feel like we were able to deliver that.
Yeah. Well, I thought that case was so interesting. It's his wife is a doctor as well, Candy Brown. What stood out to you about their research and personal experiences with miracles? Because they also approach it from a very scientific side.
That's the thing. What was so interesting about their story, and this happens a lot. Either you get a miracle or you don't, and it sparks you into this world of healing and trying to understand it more. And with the two of them, it was surprising the way that they word it. And they say this in the film. They said, look, we were Christians going into this tumor diagnosis, but we didn't believe in miracles. And there are a lot of Christians today. There are people probably watching or listening who do not believe in miracles. They read their Bible every day. They see the stories in scripture, and they feel that maybe miracles have ceased or they no longer happen. And so the Browns were in a church that kind of believed that it was no longer happening. And so it struck me that their experience obviously changed all of that. It forced them into a place where they were essentially praying all the time, believing all the time that a miracle was going to be possible for them. And it changed their entire approach, and then led them to go and create an organization where they do academic studies on miracles. So they are looking, as you said, scientifically, just like we did in this film. And in fact, they led us on some other pathways to other healing stories based on, documented evidence that they are looking at. And so that, to me, to have two people, he's a neuroscientist, right? To have two people with doctorates who are working at colleges go out and actually investigate these things, it's pretty unique and interesting.
Yeah, it really is fascinating. Through your journey, did you ever come across any cases where, despite testimonies, you were still kind of hesitant? You found it difficult to accept it as a miracle?
Look, yeah, I mean, I think we have a case in the film which is incredibly compelling, but on paper sounds insane. You have this case of Jeff Markin,
Mhm.
who is dead for 40 minutes, right? He is dead for 40 minutes. They are preparing his body to go to the morgue. And even as I'm telling this story, it sounds crazy. He's in the hospital room. He has died. They're cleaning his body up. The doctor leaves the room, and what ends up happening is this man is revived and brought back to life. And we interviewed him in this documentary. Had I not talked to him and had I only read about that case, I would have said, okay, now look, Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead, right? So we know that those things did happen in Scripture, and people can have that debate about whether or not they think it's still happening. But this was a man, even if he were to be revived, let's think about this. Okay, after 40 minutes, he had no oxygen going to his brain. He should be in a vegetative state. He is not in a vegetative state. He's completely healthy and fine. And so it's cases like that that often, that one did have scientific backing, obviously, as we explore. And the doctor involved in that case has his own story that's really incredible. But yeah, there are always for me, if the case, and here's the deal. When I experience things in my life that I feel are miraculous, they might be very simple things, right? We've had something happen in our family. And it's funny how God does things while this film has been going on with my daughter. And we've talked about this personally and her spine and what has happened. And I'm happy to get into it and explain it, where I have said, we did do medical intervention. We did do things, but I believe it was miraculous. I think when it comes to evidence, though, in a documentary like this, we want to raise the bar up to a point where we have to prove it. And so most cases don't really reach that bar where you have that documentation. It doesn't mean we shouldn't believe them. It doesn't mean we shouldn't give them credence. But I love the cases that we can definitively prove.
Well, yeah, tell me a little bit more about your daughter's situation. Obviously, we've all been praying for her, followed this for years. Share a little about this.
Absolutely. Yeah. So Liliana is 9 years old. And when she turned 6, it was just after her birthday, like a week after, we went for a normal physical. And she went with my older daughter, who was 9 at the time. And they start checking your spine around 9 years old to make sure there's no scoliosis. We've all gone through that. And they checked my older daughter. She was fine. They went to check Lily. And when she bent down, the doctor immediately said, you need to get her to a specialist. Something doesn't look right. And so, of course, we were like, oh my gosh, okay. Now, my wife had scoliosis, and we just hadn't really thought, and she had to go through spinal surgery and learning how to walk again when she was 15 years old. And so we just hadn't really thought a lot about it, though, that maybe it would be passed on somehow. So we went to the specialist, and it was really kind of a traumatizing appointment, because you go from like, hey, you have this normal 6-year-old who's running around and having fun, to she needs to be in a brace, a full torso brace, 21 hours a day, which means she needs to basically live in this thing, and she gets a 3-hour break. That's a lot for a kid. It's a lot, there are worse things in life, but it was a real big transition for her and for our family. And even being able to do things like, is she going to feel comfortable in this big brace, everywhere we go? And so we went into that journey, and we left the office, and I felt that day, I was praying about it, and I'm like, God, lead us somewhere where they can help us. Because really it was very much keep her in the brace, and we'll check her every 6 months. And then eventually, if it doesn't get better, she'll have to have surgery. She was at a 34-degree curve, which is really substantial. When you hit 50, you need surgery. And so God forbid, if you have to give a 6-year-old surgery, she's not going to grow properly. So there were so many fearful issues that we had. But long story short, we found a doctor, and this is a person who people fly all over the world to see. He's 30 minutes from our house. And we started seeing him, and he does all sorts of, chiropractic and workouts with her. And she's under 10 degrees now. She went from 34 degrees. Her back is almost completely straight. There's no scoliosis at the moment to treat, and that could change tomorrow. And she's out of her brace entirely. And so it's a total, it really is a miracle. And we've just been like, wow, God, thank you. And we're just praying it continues. So that was happening while we were filming this. And it was kind of lost on me until recently that, I was experiencing some of this in my own life.
Oh, the way God works is so cool sometimes.
It really is.
That's
It really is.
amazing. Skeptics often say, when they look at a miraculous recovery, they say, well, it was a medical anomaly. Well, it was a misdiagnosis, right? How does the documentary address these arguments?
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting because Lee Strobel talks about some of the numbers on miracles because most Americans, when you look at the polling, we've seen everything from 80% to 66%. The reality is the majority of Americans believe in medical miracles. They believe that this is possible in the modern era. And that's interesting to me in light of the fact that we're in such a secular material culture that the majority still believe that. You have to start pulling yourself back and looking at the numbers and saying, well, why do they believe that? Well, they believe it because a lot of us have seen what I just talked about. We've seen it in our own lives. We've felt it, especially for Christians. Now, this doesn't address the secular part. Christians will feel that and understand it and know that something is going on, or we've seen other people experience that. And so it leads us to a place of saying we're really open to this. We think it is possible. But when you have all of these stories that are so otherworldly and impossible to explain, how many times can you really say, well, something weird happened, but I guess we just can't explain it? It's like, well, if a tumor is disappearing, if a person's paralyzed for 10 years, as you saw in the documentary, and we address Brian LaPoo, and he's desperately seeking healing, and he goes to a prayer meeting, and immediately his hands are opening up and he's able to walk out. What happened during that prayer meeting that changed things? So we address the theology of that, we address the complexity of it, and we also address, and I think this is really, really important, that not everybody gets healed and not everybody gets a miracle. And there are times even Lazarus died after he was raised in the Bible, right? I mean, the miracles will run out at some point, but that doesn't mean they're not happening. And so we get into all of that, and it's complicated. Not getting the miracle is a very difficult, painful thing that I know people listening and watching right now can relate to.
Yes, absolutely. I'm glad you addressed that because I do think it can be tough to reconcile faith in miracles with the fact that some prayers for healing don't go answered.
Yeah. Well, and they don't go answered. And I think this is one of the bigger challenges that we probably have. Yeah, I think this is good for even atheists and agnostics to hear because, for a Christian, we're supposed to put our faith in God. And I want to be careful how I say this, but when you look at God, God knows everything. He has a plan. And I'm not saying that his plan is for people to be sick and die. What I'm saying is that there are moments he intervenes and there are moments that he doesn't. And there are moments that, I think of 9/11 often, not to overcomplicate this, but how many people on 9/11 made it to work that day? They were in the towers. They went through that horrific event. And then there were so many stories of people whose cars broke down or things happened and they couldn't get to work that day and they weren't there and they were supposed to be. And so there's a lot of mystery in some of this. But I think my point is we're called to trust in God's plan no matter what the outcome, while at the same time believing that healing is possible, believing that these things can happen. And that's a really tough tension point for us to live in. But when we fully give ourselves over to God, I think we're more easily able to do that. And we can fight till the very end and say, I want healing. I'm going to fight for it. And we may not get it. And we have to be comfortable with that. And that's difficult.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you mentioned that secular audiences are really interested in this documentary as well, which is so cool because this is a CBN project. Share a little bit about that and why you think there's an interest there.
Yeah, I think, it's funny, just like at Halloween time, and it's a separate but related topic, right? At Halloween time, Hollywood is churning out movies about demons and ghosts and all these spiritual things. And you have a dynamic in which, on that front, the secular world is sometimes talking more about spiritual things, and they're not doing it in the right way theologically, but they're talking more about it than some churches are. And that is because when it comes to miracles, when it comes to healing, when it comes to obviously even illness itself, when it comes to the spiritual matters I just mentioned around Halloween, this goes back to the beginning of time. Human beings have always grappled with these things, always experienced them, always have questions about them. Whether you believe in God or not, everyone's going to die, right? Everyone's going to get sick. This is going to happen to all of us. And so I think there's a natural intrigue and interest in it. And I think for a lot of secularists and atheists, they want to understand. They want to understand what Christians believe, but they're also curious. I think we all are. We want to know what's on the other side. And the Christians have an answer to that. And so I think, we've seen a number of magazines and others reach out with some interest in this project because I think the approach is not for me to beat you over the head and tell you all these miracles are real. I think after doing the project, I walked away very convicted, and I'm happy to explain why, but also feeling like these were really compelling cases that I don't have answers to. And I know for certain the atheists and agnostics won't have answers to them either. So my hope is that there's a challenge that people will think deeper because of the approach.
Yes, share more about this conviction. After making the documentary, are you still a skeptic?
I am always going to approach every case with prove it to me, right? Because I need it to be proven to me. But where I really had a struggle with myself was if I were terminally ill or a loved one were terminally ill before working on this project, okay, I would have prayed, right? But would I have fought? I mean, every one of these cases, and you saw, so every one of these cases, these were not people who got healing immediately. Like they showed up to one prayer event and they got healing. These were people who fought. They fought to the bitter end of their struggle. And in that fight, it made me think, gosh, would I have done that? And I think the answer is no. Like I would not have done, I would have given up at some point. I would have said, I'm going to die probably. I've tried everything. I've prayed. And it really changed the way I would look at this in terms of the trust I would put in God. And I would show up now and pray until the very end and fight for that because they all did that. And I'm not saying that if you do that, you're going to get the miracle. But what I am saying is that was the key thing that stuck out to me. They all fought. They would show up. If a pastor didn't, there was one family, Josh and Candy Brown, if a pastor did not pray over them at an event they went to and they wanted him to, they would find his hotel room, knock on the door, bring him out and in his robe and have him pray over them. I mean, that was the level of perseverance and desperation. So that was convicting to me in my own faith, and I think helped me grow in that area quite a bit.
Just incredible. Billy, thank you so much.
Thank you. Really appreciate it.